I only needed shelter. But that old roller had been waiting for me.
She was 22 and dispossessed. No room, no family key, no coat fit for winter, just a canvas sewing bag and $6 she had counted twice beneath a bus station lamp. And with that $6, she bought a forgotten straw hat weaver's loft outside Foxborough in Norfolk County, Massachusetts, a place that vanished from tax maps in 1937. The north sill had split beneath the wall. Rain entered through 3 squares of roof. Norfolk County condemned it on September 14th, 2022, with demolition planned for the first thaw, inside a hollow ironwood plating roller, unopened for 89 years, weighted money, a book of impossible patterns, and a material no sunlight had dimmed. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Cora Bell had been separating useful things from ruined ones her whole life without knowing it. As a child in North Attleborough, she pulled bent nails from fence boards, washed jam jars clear, and sorted buttons in an old tobacco tin. Her father called it fussing, her mother called it making do. Cora liked the instant when a discarded thing, handled carefully, began to show what it still could become. Her father, Walter, repaired municipal boilers and came home smelling of iron dust and wet wool. He showed affection by leaving sharpened pencils beside her schoolbooks and testing the window latches before storms. After his heart failed when she was 11, bills gathered beneath a blue ceramic hen, and the house lost its calm. The steadier room belonged to her grandfather Elias Bell, who lived above a narrow shed with a green door. Every Saturday he set a kettle on the stove, spread rye straw over linen, and taught her the habits of old handwork. He had repaired bonnet machinery for Foxborough families who still remembered straw plaiting. With a grooved bone splitter, he divided each stalk lengthwise, soaped the ribbons until they bent without whitening, and worked 7 strands into a braid as even as rainfall. Cora held the damp ends while he counted. After lunch they passed the braid through a wooden roller, flattened it, and coiled it against a plaster crown. Elias used pale silk thread, burying each stitch beneath the next turn until the seam disappeared. Waste is only a name given by hurried people, he told her. She carried the sentence as a way of looking. A broken thing deserved examination before judgment. Elias died in February 2016 after a week of pneumonia. When Cora reached his shed, Daniel had already ordered a clearance truck. The splitter, hat blocks, notebooks, and a roll of gold-coloured straw were gone. Daniel said mildew had taken them. Cora rubbed one thumb over the groove where the roller had rested. Daniel was 8 years older and spoke softly when he wanted obedience. He wore clean cuffs while the accounts failed and placed documents before their mother with yellow tabs marking each signature. He called risk opportunity and secrecy efficiency. When he asked Cora to sign a limited power of attorney for repairs and insurance, he covered the second page with his hand. Months later, she learned it had allowed him to mortgage their inherited house for a Providence restaurant. The restaurant closed before its ovens were paid. On October 3rd, 2022, a bank officer fastened a red notice to the front door with 4 bright staples. Cora's mother stood in the hallway holding Walter's brass key, worn smooth by his thumb. Daniel had left before dawn. Rain ticked against the officer's plastic folder. "You signed it," her mother said. Then came exactly 8 words. "You should have read what your brother gave you." Cora took the sewing bag from its hook. Her mother did not offer the key, though it no longer opened anything they owned. She closed her fingers around it and stepped aside. That small movement, making room for Cora to pass, was the last permission the house gave her. For 6 weeks, Cora slept wherever a ceiling could be burrowed. 2 nights passed in the Pawtucket bus terminal beneath a broken clock. In Providence, she hid behind folding chairs in a church basement until a custodian found her and left a wool blanket without asking her name. She spent one night in a Mansfield laundromat beside dryers breathing warm lint, then slept under the loading bay of a closed Attleborough furniture store. Her money diminished by coins, $4.80 after coffee and a roll, $3.10 after bus fare, $1.63 after aspirin. She washed in library sinks, dried socks beneath hand blowers, and learned which benches had center rails to keep her body upright. By mid-November, she held $6 again only because the church custodian had pressed a 5 into the folded blanket. At the Boyden Library in Foxborough, she opened the local weekly because the heat made her drowsy. Near the obituaries, a notice sat inside a crooked black box. Tax taken structure. Former Bell Straw Works loft. Land excluded. Restoration required. Sealed bids accepted. Minimum $6. Beneath it, someone had written in pencil, "Ask Clark about demolition." Cora read it 3 times. The surname might have been coincidence and the price a county joke, but former Bell Straw Works held her more firmly than shelter did. She copied the address onto a grocery receipt, folded the $6 into her father's pencil wrapper, and checked the eastbound bus schedule. By closing time, she had chosen the road before knowing where she would sleep along it. At dawn. Cora boarded with the notice in her pocket and Elias Bell's sentence moving quietly beside her. The bus carried Cora 12 miles before the driver pulled over beside a shuttered farm stand and told her the route ended there. A cold rain had begun, thin enough to look harmless from behind glass. She stepped down with the sewing bag beneath her coat and walked east along West Street, where stone walls divided bare fields and November water darkened the trunks of maples. By dusk she had covered 9 miles. The temperature fell to 31 degrees, and she crawled into a hay barn through a door that would not close, making a hollow among the bales and tying her shoes together so she would wake if anyone moved them. The hay smelled of summer kept too long. Mice worked behind the boards. She slept in pieces, waking each time the wind pressed the loose metal roof upward and let it fall. Before sunrise, Cora brushed the stalks from her hair and walked the final 4 miles into Foxborough. The town announced itself by ordinary signs, the common cafe steaming its windows, Keating's Hardware with rakes chained outside, the Orpheum Barber Shop turning its striped pole, a narrow storefront marked Bay State Insurance, and Tully's Pharmacy, where a delivery man carried grey crates through the side door. None of the businesses appeared prosperous enough to be careless. Their awnings had been patched, their thresholds swept. The Norfolk County Satellite Office occupied a former savings bank near the Common. Its stone steps were worn lower at the centre, and inside, the radiators clicked beneath windows tall enough for another century. Cora waited behind a man renewing a dog license and a woman arguing over a boundary assessment. The clerk sat beneath a brass nameplate that read MRS. Helen Marrow, Deeds and Tax Titles. She wore a silver chain around her glasses and pushed each completed form to the left with the side of one finger. When Cora placed the classified notice on the counter, Mrs. Marrow studied first the paper, then Cora's damp sleeves. "You understand there is no legal dwelling permit?" "Yes." "Ma'am, you understand the parcel includes the structure only?" "Yes." "Ma'am, you understand the county will not repair the road?" "Roof?" "Well?" "Saw chimney?" "Yes." "Ma'am, you understand demolition begins in April unless an inspector sees measurable progress?" "Yes." "Ma'am." Mrs. Marrow removed her glasses. Pale dents remained on either side of her nose. "And you have $6. Cora laid the bills down, 1 5 and 1 single, both softened by many hands. The clerk took the payment without smiling. She opened a ledger whose binding had been repaired with black tape, copied Cora's name, and turned the book around for her signature. The fountain pen dragged slightly over the paper. Then Mrs. Marrow carried the deed to a brass press fixed at the end of the counter. She fitted the page beneath its round plate and pulled the handle. The stamp landed with the sound of a small door closing. Mrs. Marrow gave directions in the same exact voice she had used for the warnings. "Take South Street past the old burial ground. Turn right where the pavement narrows beside the cranberry ditch. You will see 2 stone posts, though one has fallen. Follow that lane for 3/4 of a mile. The loft stands beyond the walnuts." She began assembling Cora's copies, then stopped with one page lifted in her hand. "Bell," she said. Cora waited. "Was Elias Bell related to you?" "My grandfather." Mrs. Marrow lowered the page. The office continued around them, a drawer sliding shut, a telephone ringing once, the dog licensing man coughing into his glove. He came here every January, the clerk said. Always the second Tuesday, no matter the weather. He searched the old manufacturing transfers and asked whether the Bell property had entered forfeiture. He knew about it. He knew it remained Mrs. Marrow opened the bottom drawer and took out a narrow card mottled with age. Across the top, in Elias's careful block letters, was written Bell Straw Works, South Road Loft. Below it were dates, deed numbers, and small corrections in blue ink. He said the building should not be sold with the land because the workroom had been moved there before the parcel was divided. The county disagreed for 30 years. Last spring, an archivist found the original separation agreement behind a map cabinet. Cora touched the edge of the card but did not lift it. Did he ever say why he wanted it? Mrs. Marrow looked toward the rain tracing the tall windows. Only that a family had once left its best work unfinished. She slid the card beneath Cora's deed. The single dollar remained on the counter after the clerk counted the payment.
Mrs.
Marrow placed it in her desk drawer rather than the cash box, as though separating it from ordinary revenue. Outside, the rain had become sleet. Cora walked south with the papers wrapped inside the sewing bag. At the burial ground, slate markers leaned among brown grass. The road narrowed beyond a shallow ditch where cranberry vines showed dark red beneath the water. A woman in a quilted green coat stood at a mailbox with a brindled hound pressed against her knees. The dog gave one deep bark, then watched silently. "You headed to the Bell place?" the woman asked. Cora nodded. The woman pointed with 2 fingers. "Stay left at the split. Right side sinks near the marsh." The hound sniffed Cora's wet cuff. Its nose was cold and deliberate. "Name's Doris Avery," the woman said. "That's Otis. He judges slower than people do." She lifted the mailbox flag and went inside without asking what Cora planned to do with the property. The lane began between 2 granite posts, one upright and one lying under brambles. Walnut trees leaned over the track. Their branches nearly bare, black husks broke beneath Cora's soles, releasing a bitter green smell. Beyond them the land dipped toward a reed-filled marsh, and the loft appeared on a rise no higher than a table. It was smaller than the classified drawing suggested, roughly 24 feet long and 16 wide, built of weathered chestnut boards over a stone foundation. The roof sagged slightly above the north wall. 2 chimneys rose from it, though the rear one had lost its cap and carried a sumac sapling in the mortar. An old sign hung from one chain beneath the front eave. Bell and Daughters, straw plaiting, and bonnet rooms. The final word had faded until only the nail holes remained around it. Cora stood under the sign while sleet ticked against the roof. The brass key supplied by the clerk entered the lock but would not turn. She leaned her shoulder against the door, lifted as she twisted, and felt the swollen wood rise from the stone threshold. The door opened 6 inches and struck something inside. She reached through the gap and moved a fallen stool with her foot. Dust came out first, dry and mineral, followed by the odour of mouse nests, damp plaster, and old straw warmed by summers no one remembered. The front room held a counter, 3 shelves, and a cast-iron stove filmed red with rust. Light entered through cracked glass and settled in long bars across the floor. Her boots made the boards answer one by one. The back room was hotter despite the cold day, its low ceiling trapping the smell of oat straw and machine oil. Webs joined the rafters to 2 wooden rollers mounted in an iron frame. A plaster hat block rested on its side beneath a bench. When Cora ran one finger over it, the dust felt soft as flour, but the plaster beneath remained cool and hard. Something moved above her. She heard wings, then the scratch of claws inside the chimney. A soot-blackened feather dropped into the stove. Cora opened the rear door and found the well 15 paces away, capped by a warped board. Beyond it, marsh water flashed pewter beneath the evening sky. She tasted a snowflake when she raised her face. It carried the faint iron flavor of the coming freeze. There was no dry wood. She ate half a roll saved from the morning and drank from the public fountain bottle she had filled in town. As darkness gathered, the loft changed sound. The walls clicked inward with the cold. Wind entered beneath the north sill and moved the straw fragments in small circles. She chose a place near the front wall where the floor felt solid. The sewing bag became her pillow, and the deed stayed inside her coat. She wrapped herself in the church blanket and watched moonlight sharpen the broken edges of the window. Near midnight, the sign outside turned on its remaining chain. Each movement made a slow wooden knock against the eave. Cora listened until the rhythm no longer sounded like warning. Some things wait because they have not finished being useful. For the first 3 days, Cora worked by daylight and learned the loft through its failures. The well rope had rotted halfway through, so she replaced it with braided clothesline bought from a farm stand and lowered the bucket slowly until it struck water at 26 feet. The first drawer came up brown with leaves. By the 7th it cleared enough to boil. The outhouse leaned toward the marsh, but held firm when she braced its rear wall with a chestnut board. At night she mapped the floor by sound. 1 low complaint near the stove, 2 quick ticks beside the counter, and a hollow answer beneath the workroom bench. On the 4th morning she walked back to Keating's Hardware. The store smelled of kerosene cut pine, and the dark metal dust that gathered around bins of loose screws. Its owner, Thomas Keating, had a white crescent scar crossing the knuckle of his right thumb. He listened while Cora described the chimney, the leaking roof, and the $6 deed, sorting square nails into paper sacks without looking down. "How much money have you got left?" he asked. 38 cents. He tied 1 sack with cotton string. "Then we will call this an account. I cannot promise when I can pay." I did not ask when. He opened a drawer and placed a soft-covered booklet on the counter. The title read Repairs for the Owner-Built House, 1948 edition. Its spine had been mended with electrician's tape. "My father kept that under his truck seat," Keating said. "It has survived worse judgment than yours." Cora carried away a chimney brush for $3.20, 50 feet of rope for $1.85, a putty knife for 75 cents, 2 pounds of cut nails for $1.10, and a box of stove matches marked 29 cents. Keating wrote each price in a narrow ledger and drew no line beneath the total. The chimney took 7 hours. Cora tied the round wire brush to the new rope, climbed onto the rear roof from a ladder borrowed behind the store, and lowered it through the uncapped flue. The first pull stopped after 3 feet. She raised it 6 inches, twisted, and drove it downward again. Flakes of creosote broke loose inside, tapping the stovepipe like hard rain. By noon her palms had blistered. She wrapped them in strips torn from the lining of her sewing bag and continued, working the brush from above, then from the firebox with an iron poker. A bird's nest came down in dry ropes, followed by soot thick enough to fill 2 flour sacks. Near the bend she found a plug of black glaze, shiny as cooled tar. She chipped it away a thumb width at a time until the brush passed cleanly from cap to stove. At dusk she held a candle beneath the open damper. The flame leaned inward. Cora fed the stove 3 walnut twigs, a twist of newspaper, and 1 split length of dry chestnut Doris had left beside the door without a note. Smoke curled once into the room, then gathered itself and rose. The iron began to tick. Rust warmed into the smell of pennies held too long in her hand. She boiled well water for 10 minutes and cooked oats in a dented tin cup. The meal tasted faintly of smoke and metal. She ate it sitting on the floor with both hands around the cup while heat reached her knees. The following morning, she began the workroom inventory. She found 7 plaster hat blocks, each marked at the base with a size and a woman's name in pencil. A grooved bone splitter rested inside a drawer lined with newspaper from 1918. There were 2 curved bonnet needles, a maple measuring wheel, a spool stand holding silk thread gone the color of old teeth, and a narrow iron press with jaws shaped to flatten braid without cutting it. Beneath the bench lay a bundle of rye stalks wrapped in linen, brittle at the tips but still golden near the knots. The largest machine occupied the north wall. Its frame was cast iron, bolted to the floor, with 2 horizontal rollers turned by a hand crank. The lower roller was oak and badly checked. The upper was darker, almost black beneath the grime, and capped at both ends with cedar discs held by 3 brass screws. Cora wiped the machine with a damp rag. The upper roller measured 38 inches long and nearly 8 across. Ironwood? She guessed, though Elias had once told her that old makers used whatever timber resisted crushing. She turned the crank. Nothing moved. She removed the belt, soaked the bearings with lamp oil, and worked the handle backward a fraction at a time. Rust released in reddish grains. After an hour, the lower roller shifted with a groan. The upper remained fixed. Cora tapped each roller with the wooden handle of her putty knife. The oak answered with a flat, dense knock. The dark roller answered differently near its centre. She struck it again, moving 1 inch at a time from left to right. At both ends, the sound stayed heavy. In the middle 12 inches, it became rounder, with a faint second note underneath. As though the wood enclosed a smaller room, she fetched the maple measuring wheel and weighed each end by lifting against a loop of rope passed over a ceiling beam. The left side pulled harder than the right by several pounds. A solid roller should not have done that. Cora sat on the floor and studied the cedar disc. The 3 brass screws were not identical. 2 had machine-cut slots. The third had been cut by hand, its groove slightly crooked. She cleaned it with the point of a bonnet needle, pressed the screwdriver down, and turned. The screw resisted until the metal gave a small dry sigh. She removed all 3 and set them in a row. The cedar disc did not fall. A seam, nearly invisible beneath wax, circled its edge. Cora warmed the putty knife over the stove, slid the blade into the line, and worked around the circumference without forcing it. The disc came free in her palm. Behind it was darkness and the sweet, enclosed smell of cedar. Cora did not reach inside. She tilted the roller and listened. Something shifted with a padded weight. She unbolted the upper bearing, lowered the roller onto 2 folded blankets, and turned the open end toward the window. A package wrapped in oilcloth slid forward but stopped at the lip. She hooked it with the bent end of a bonnet needle and drew it out 1 inch at a time. The bundle was followed by another, then a narrow tin box whose corners had been sealed with black wax. Last came a roll of straw bound in blue ribbon. The straw was unlike the brittle bundle under the bench. It shone with a warm, steady yellow, not metallic, but bright in the way wheat appears when evening light passes through it. Cora bent 1 strand between finger and thumb. It flexed without cracking. The first oilcloth package held tools. There was a small ivory splitter with 11 grooves, a steel bodkin, 3 gauges for measuring plate width, and a thimble worn thin along one side. Each object had been rubbed with oil before wrapping. None carried rust. The second package contained a ledger no larger than Cora's hand. Its pages were filled with braid diagrams drawn in brown ink, 7-strand herringbone, split diamond lace, open ladder, and patterns Cora had never seen, some requiring 9 or 11 prepared splints crossed in sequences marked by tiny numbers. Tucked into the back cover was an envelope bearing no name. She placed the envelope beside her and did not open it. The tin box required longer. Cora softened the wax near the stove, scraped it from the hinges, and lifted the lid. Inside lay cloth rolls tied with linen thread. The first contained $20 gold pieces. The second held $10 eagles and $5 half eagles. A smaller pouch carried Morgan's silver dollars, their edges dark but their faces clear. Beneath them were folded banknotes, mostly hundreds and fifties, wrapped around a bronze military medal suspended from a faded ribbon. Cora read the medal's rim beneath the window. Spanish War Service. When 1898, She counted at the counter because its surface was level. Each stack went beneath a different plaster block so a draft could not disturb the notes. She wrote totals on the back of the classified advertisement. Gold $12,400 by face value. Silver $463. Banknotes $20,037. She added once, then again. The cash totaled $32,900. The figure sat on the paper without explanation. Cora returned every coin to its cloth roll and every note to its original band. She placed the medal on top, closed the tin, and wrapped the ledger in the oilcloth again. Only the unopened envelope remained on the counter. Outside, evening had lowered over the marsh. The water had turned black except where the last light held along its bends. Cora carried the envelope to the back step, but kept it sealed between both hands. She had spent weeks searching for a place where no one could remove her before morning. Now the loft had given her more than shelter, and she did not yet know whether receiving it required obedience, courage, or only patience. She set the letter beside the stove. Then she went outside and watched the marsh water until the cold entered her sleeves, and the windows behind her began to glow. Some things wait because they have not finished being useful. Morning came pale through the cracked front windows. Cora heated water, washed soot from her fingers, and sat at the counter with the envelope before her. The writing across its face leaned slightly right, each capital formed with a flat upper stroke. She had seen that hand on labels beneath Elias's hat blocks, and on birthday cards he signed without ornament. The paper opened along 4 deep creases. My dear one, whoever you are, if you have opened the ironwood roller, then the workroom has passed beyond every person I knew how to name. I am Ruth Abigail Bell, daughter of Nathaniel Bell, and I write from Boston, where Dr. Miriam Hale of Massachusetts General Hospital has told me that the cancer in my stomach will not permit another winter. She has been honest, and I ask the same honesty of you. Our trade began with Mercy Bell in 1817 at Wrentham, where she plaited rice straw after the year's grain was threshed. Her son Amos moved the benches to Foxborough in 1849. Amos's daughter Lydia Bell Carter opened this loft in 1878 and placed women's names beside their work instead of hiding them beneath a merchant's label. I inherited the room from Lydia in 1906 and kept it with my daughter Esther until the last order was completed. Bell and Daughters closed on October 17, 1929. There has been silence here for more than 30 years. My husband, Samuel Reed Bell, died at Bellow Wood in June 1918. The medal in the box belonged to his older brother Thomas, who served in Cuba in 1898 and returned with a cough that never left him. The folded flag is not here. I placed it where the west walnut divides into 3 trunks. Look for Lydia's plat mark cut into stone, level with your shoulder. The gold straw is rye grown from seed my mother guarded. Divide each stalk after drying, never before. Soak the splints in water held near 110 degrees for 12 minutes, then wrap them in damp linen for 1 hour. For 7-strand plait, keep 4 splints to the left and 3 to the right, crossing from the outer edge without twisting the face. When the braid is dry, pass it through the roller twice, turning the pressure screw only 1/8 of a turn between passes. Sew on the plaster block with 8 stitches to the inch. Let the crown rest overnight before shaping the brim. Do not hurry the material. Straw remembers force. The money was earned in small payments and kept through years when banks closed their doors before working women reached the counter. Use what is necessary to make the room sound again. Keep what remains for the person who comes after you. Inheritance is not possession. It is the willingness to sharpen the splitter, sweep the floor, teach the hand beside yours, and leave the tools oiled when your own work is done. The finest braid we made began as stalks left standing at the edge of a field because no buyer wanted them. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You're welcome here. Ruth Abigail Bell, November 6, 1961. Cora read the letter twice. The second time, she rested one finger beneath each instruction as she had when Elias taught her to count the crossings. Then she folded the pages along Ruth's original creases, neither adding a new line nor smoothing away an old one. Behind the loft, the ground rose toward the walnuts. Cora walked beneath their bare branches until she found the western tree divided into 3 great trunks. At shoulder height, moss covered a flat stone set into the bark's old seam. She scraped it away with the edge of a fallen shell. The carved mark was a 7-strand braid, simplified into crossing lines. She did not pry at the stone. The letter had said where the flag was, not that it must be taken. Cora pressed her palm against the cold marker and felt the tree shifting almost imperceptibly in the wind. Back inside, she opened the tool bundle and removed the worn thimble. A small wick had been tucked into its hollow, blackened at one end. She poured a spoonful of lamp oil into the metal cup, set it on a saucer, and touched a match to the wick. The flame stood no taller than her thumbnail. Its light reached the ivory splitter, the folded letter, and the brass screws arranged beside the roller. It did not make the room grand. It made 3 careful objects visible at once. Cora began to understand the loft through the people who had given without asking for her history. The church custodian in Providence had left a blanket and $5 folded beneath it. Thomas Keating had opened an account when 38 cents was all she could name. Doris Avery had carried dried chestnut through rain and placed it outside the door. Mrs. Marrow had kept Elias's card instead of letting it disappear into a county box. None of them had rescued her. Each had only moved one obstacle far enough for her to take the next step herself. Before this story moves on, think of one small kindness someone once gave you when they could not have known how badly you needed it. A meal left quietly, a ride in poor weather, a door held open longer than courtesy required. Tell us about that kindness in the comments and name the person if their name deserves to be carried forward. That night, Cora returned the money to the roller but kept the letter, ledger, tools, and golden straw beside her blanket. The thimble lamp burned until the oil was gone. When darkness filled the room again, the heirlooms remained within reach. The first snow came on December 207 inches laid quietly over the lane and the broken north slope. Cora read the roofing chapter 3 times beside the stove, tracing each diagram with a cold finger. The roof measured 26 by 18 feet with enough pitch to demand 14 bundles of cedar shingles, 2 rolls of 30-pound felt, and 12 pounds of galvanized nails after she allowed for waste. Thomas Keating arrived carrying a roofing hatchet with a square pole and a blade worn bright at the heel. "My Uncle Martin's," he said. He fell from no roof. By noon, another man had followed his tracks. Silas Rook was 71, narrow as a lath, and had roofed barns from Walpole to the Rhode Island line. He refused the money Cora offered from the cash. "Pay me by listening once." They worked 11 days. Cora cut out the split section and sisted a sound rafter against it with carriage bolts. Silas snapped a chalk line across the felt blue powder lifting into the snowlight. He showed her how to set each nail with 3 strokes, one to place, one to drive, one to seat without bruising the shingle. On the 4th day he touched a nail head with one finger. "That nail's proud." Cora raised the hatchet. "Pull it." She did. By December 15th, the final ridge course lay tight beneath a copper cap bent on Keating's brake. Snowmelt ran down the shingles without entering the workroom. That evening Cora stood beneath the repaired slope while water moved cleanly beyond the walls. January exposed what soot had hidden. The rear chimney bricks had begun to spall, their fired faces breaking away in thin red shells, and the mortar beneath them powdered under Cora's thumb. She removed each loose joint with a narrow plugging chisel, stopping whenever the brick itself began to sound hollow. Silas mixed the repair mortar on a board, 3 parts washed sand, 1 part hydraulic lime, and 1/2 part fire clay for the joints nearest the flue. He made Cora measure it twice. They worked for 3 weeks in temperatures that stayed mostly in the 20s. Gloves caught on the rough brick, so Cora laid mortar with bare hands until her fingers went numb, then warmed them around a jar of heated stones every 15 minutes. The process was slow, dampen the joint, press mortar deep with the pointing iron, strike it slightly concave, cover it against the night freeze. Near the roofline, 3 bricks crumbled as she lifted them. Keating found replacements behind his store, salvaged from a schoolhouse chimney and close enough in size to avoid cutting. On January 27th, Cora built a test fire with dry oak and left both doors open. The smoke gathered in the throat, climbed without hesitation, and drew clean above the new cap. Outside, a straight grey line rose into the still air. Silas watched it for a minute. "That will do," he said. For him, it was praise. The white pine planks had darkened beneath a century of oil, soot, and ground-in straw. Cora lifted the worst boards, reset them over shims, and drove hand-cut rosehead nails into the old joists. Each head sat slightly proud until she finished it with a nail set, leaving the small black facets visible. Keating rented her a random orbit sander for $14 a day. She swept twice before beginning and still filled the first dust bag within an hour. The floor required 3 passes, 80 grit to cut through the blackened surface, 120 to remove the circular marks, and 220 to close the grain without polishing it beyond the oil's reach. The work took 4 days on her knees. Pine dust entered her cuffs and settled along her eyelashes. When she wiped one finished board with a damp cloth, the colour shifted from dark honey toward mahogany, revealing narrow lines where chair legs and machines had once stood. She applied 3 thin coats of boiled linseed oil, rubbing each one with cotton until no wet patches remained. After the last coat, she barred the doors and allowed a 48-hour cure. There was one morning when she did none of it. The sander sat unplugged while Cora stood at the marsh watching a great blue heron hunt among the reeds. The bird moved one leg, waited, then moved the other, patient enough that the water closed behind every step. Cora stayed until noon. She ate bread on the back step and returned no tool to her hand that day. The next morning, she resumed at the same board. 8 windows faced the lane and marsh. 3 had no glass at all. 4 held cracked panes patched with paper, and 1 retained its original hand-blown glass from 1788, faintly green and rippled enough to bend the walnut branches beyond it. Cora removed that pane first and stored it upright between folded blankets. For the other sash, she scraped each rabbit clean, brushed on linseed oil, and set the replacement glass against narrow glazing points. She warmed DAP 33 putty between her palms, rolled it into cords, and pressed it firmly along the edges. With the putty knife held at a low angle, she drew each bevel in one continuous stroke so the compound remained invisible from inside. The sash cords had broken in 5 frames. Cora used 1/4-inch cotton cord, feeding it over the pulleys and tying a figure-8 knot at each counterweight. When one weight slipped into the pocket, she lay on the floor with her arm inside the wall until her fingers found the cord in the dust. The preserved pane returned to the eastern window. Its old bubbles caught the afternoon light, and Cora fixed it with the smallest points she could buy. On the last window, she trimmed the final line of putty and lifted the sash to test its balance. Outside, a chickadee landed on a walnut branch no thicker than wire. It turned its black-capped head toward her, gave one clear note, and remained while she lowered the window gently into place. The walls had been plastered with horsehair over hand-split oak lath, each strip uneven and held by nails blackened with age. Near the chimney, heat and settling had opened 3 wounds larger than dinner plates. Cora's first patch slumped before dusk. The second cracked around its edge. The third remained attached overnight, then fell when she closed the stove door. Thomas Keating brought an old feed bag from his father's shed. A bundle of horsehair lay inside, clean but tangled. "Wash it twice," he said. "Comb it once." Cora mixed lime plaster and folded in the damp hair until every handful resisted her fingers. She pressed a scored scratch coat through the lath, added a 3/8-inch brown coat, and left it undisturbed for 72 hours. The finish coat went on 1/8 inch thick beneath a wet steel trowel. When the final patch had set, its surface showed the slight movement of her hand. These patches will hold another 100 years. She left them unpainted. Doris Avery began leaving paper bags on the doorstep every Thursday. Her red hair was always pinned with one black comb, and the bags contained heel slices from the cafe loaves, 2 eggs, or a wedge of pie whose crust had broken before it reached the display case. Cora carried the first empty bag back to the common cafe with 3 coins in her palm. Doris pushed Cora's hand away using the flat of a pie server. In candles when the shop reopens. No shop had been promised, but Doris said it as though she had already seen light in the windows. Caleb Mercer arrived one Saturday on a blue Schwinn bicycle, steering with one hand and balancing a splitting maul across the handlebars. He was 16, with a cowlick that lifted beneath his wool cap. Without introducing himself, he split the walnut rounds behind the loft into stove lengths and stacked them bark side upward. When Cora offered payment, she shook his head. "My mother said, about your grandfather." He did not explain further. Before leaving, she sharpened the maul against the stone step and swept the chips into a basket. Reverend Boyd walked the lane each morning before 7. He wore a brown felt hat in every weather and tipped it toward the windows, whether Cora was visible or not. One icy morning he found her struggling to lift a sash weight from the snow. He set down his walking stick, raised the weight into her hands, and offered the same 4-word prayer he used thereafter. Keep her work honest. Then he continued toward town. Cora postponed the cellar until February 11th. Its fieldstone floor measured 12 by 15 feet and lay beneath 7 granite steps polished at their centers. Water had entered along the eastern wall, leaving a pale mineral line, but the beams above remained firm. At the center of the floor stood a dressed granite slab unlike the surrounding stone. A 7-strand plat mark had been carved into its face. Cora cleared the dirt from its edges, tested one corner with the pry bar, and stopped. Ruth had named no cellar chamber, and not every sealed thing required opening. Under the 3rd step, her fingers found a small oak box wedged behind a loose stone. Inside lay a brass key. Its bow had been shaped into the crossed strands of the Bell plate mark. Beneath it was a tintype wrapped in flannel. The photograph showed a young woman standing outside the loft in the summer of 1903. She held an ivory straw splitter against her apron. Her mouth was firmer than Cora's. Her hair parted differently. Yet the face carried the same narrow chin and the same slight unevenness above the left brow. On the back, a hand had scratched. Ruth Bell, daughter of Nathaniel, age 25, summer of 1903. Cora set the photograph beside the letter and placed the brass key on the mantel. She did not know what it opened. Snow withdrew from the marsh in grey islands. The creek grew loud with meltwater, and pale walnut catkins loosened over the lane. Cora repaired the front counter, planted rye seed in a narrow test bed, and copied 3 patterns from Ruth's ledger onto brown paper. She did not begin a full bonnet that spring. Her hands could split straw and hold 7 strands, but they could not yet keep the tension exact through an entire crown. From the cash, she chose 1 worn Morgan dollar and exchanged it for linen thread, fresh rye seed, and a small quantity of silk. She practiced on samples no longer than her hand, unplating each mistake before beginning again. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, on December 8th, 2024, Cora completed the first bonnet made in the loft since Ruth had closed the trade. She had prepared the rye in August, cutting it above the first joint and drying it beneath cotton cloth so the sun would not bleach it unevenly. In December she split the stalks, soaked them near 110 degrees, and wrapped them in damp linen. The 7-strand braid passed twice through the restored ironwood roller. She coiled it around Lydia's plaster block and buried 8 silk stitches inside every inch. The finished bonnet was plain by the ledger's standards. Its brim curved gently, and a narrow split diamond band circled the crown. One crossing near the back sat half a thread too wide. Cora left it there. The room around it had become sound and useful again. White pine floors held the warm depth of oil. Restored windows turned the winter marsh into 8 wavering pictures. Hat blocks stood in a careful row. The stove drew cleanly, and the old counter carried no decoration beyond Ruth's thimble lamp and a jar of sharpened pencils. Above the workbench, Cora had hung the tintype from the cellar. The brass key remained on the mantel until the following April, when wind tore a dead branch from the western walnut. The break exposed a dark rectangle in the trunk beneath the plat-marked stone. Cora fetched the key. Behind the stone lay a greened brass plate no larger than her palm. The key entered its lock and turned after one drop of oil. A narrow compartment opened inside the tree, lined with cedar and dry despite the years. Within it rested a folded 48-star American flag and a note wrapped in waxed cloth. The note belonged to Ruth's mother, Esther Bell, and was dated July 4, 1918. My Ruth, the telegram came before noon. Samuel was killed in France in June, in the fighting at Belleau Wood. I have folded his flag here because grief has entered every room, and I will not permit it to take the workroom also. Your father says wood closes slowly around a wound. Perhaps people do the same. We must not confuse closing with forgetting. When the tree has grown enough to cover this box, let it keep the flag until someone finds it without being told. That person will understand that memory is not an object displayed every day. Sometimes it is a duty kept dry in darkness. Mother, Cora carried the flag indoors against her chest. She aired it on a linen sheet, refolded it along its existing lines, and returned Esther's note to the waxed cloth. On November 11th, she took Thomas Bell's Spanish War Service Medal to Rock Hill Cemetery in Foxborough, a burial ground maintained by the local cemetery corporation. There was no ceremony. Cora cleaned the Bell family marker, set the medal beneath a small glass cover, and stood through the 11 o'clock silence while dry leaves crossed the path. Reverend Boyd removed his brown hat. Caleb, now taller than Cora, placed one hand on the stone. Of the $32,900, Cora spent only 4 coins. The first bought her practice materials. The second paid for a replacement fireback when the old iron split. The third purchased seed from a rye grower in Maine. The fourth bought a pane of hand-drawn glass for the only window whose modern surface cast the room too sharply. She returned the banknotes, gold pieces, silver dollars, and medal cloth to the tin box. Inside its lid she fixed a card in her own handwriting. For the roof, the fire, the tools, and the next one. Take only what keeps the work alive. The box went back into the roller. Cora replaced the cedar disc, seated the handmade screw in its crooked groove, and rubbed beeswax into the seam. The shop reopened without announcement. Doris pinned an index card to the corkboard at the common cafe. Bell and Daughters. Hand-plaited straw. Repairs. Small orders. Lessons by appointment. The first customer brought a bonnet crushed beneath winter coats. The second asked Cora to replace a broken braid on a child's summer hat. By July, the mailing list contained 43 names written in pencil. Cora accepted only the work she could finish carefully. She charged enough for thread, heat, seed, and time. When someone asked for speed, she gave them the address of a factory supplier. Caleb returned near the end of that summer carrying a plank wrapped in sacking. He had carved a new sign from walnut taken from the branch that exposed the flag compartment. The letters followed the shape of the old inscription, but the plank was longer. Bell and Daughters. Cora ran her fingers over the final word. There is only one of me, she said. Caleb set the sign against the wall. His cowlick was gone. though he still pushed his cap back with the same impatient hand. Not forever. They hung it beneath the eave using the original iron brackets. Doris watched from the lane with Otis's successor, a brindled hound that distrusted ladders. Thomas Keating stood below holding nails in his scarred hand. Reverend Boyd offered no prayer this time. He simply tipped his hat when the sign settled level. That evening, Cora opened a fresh sheet of paper at the restored counter. "My dear one, whoever you are," she wrote her name, the date, and the truthful account of the $6 deed. She described the roof, the chimney, the cellar slab she had chosen not to lift, and the 4 coins taken from the cash. She copied Ruth's instructions for preparing straw, then added what 2 winters of practice had taught her. Stop when the hands lose accuracy. Never flatten damp braid. Leave one honest imperfection so the next maker will know the work was human. She did not decide who would read the letter. Inheritance had stopped, meaning the objects Daniel took, the house, the bank sealed, or the money hidden in the roller. It had become a sharpened splitter placed beside clean linen, a repaired wall holding through winter, and Caleb's name added to the account ledger after his first complete length of 7-strand braid. Some things wait because they have not finished being useful. At dusk, Cora carried the new letter into the workroom and laid it beside Ruth's inside the hollow roller. She fastened the cedar disc, swept the day's straw from the floor, and left the smallest lamp burning in the front window. Beyond the walnuts, marsh water moved through reeds without holding their reflection for long. The straw hat weaver's loft waits. It has always waited. In the county office, Helen Marrow retired the following spring. While emptying her desk, she found the softened $1 bill from Cora's payment lying beneath Elias Bell's index card. Mrs. Marrow placed both inside a plain envelope, wrote "Pied in full" across it, and returned it to the bottom drawer for the next clerk to find.